Rangers fans, welcome to Season 4 of Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast powered by Believe Network. I'm Andrew Chelney alongside Nick Zararis. And Nick, today we are joined by one of the best in the business. He's been doing this for a long time. We are thrilled to have him. Arthur Staple joins us to talk shop. Stape, how are you?
I'm good, boys. How we doing?
Pretty good. Awesome. I mean, the Rangers remembered how to win 3 games in a row for the first time in a year.
An entire calendar year has passed. The bit is over. They finally did it. We can raise the banners.
Yeah. Well, if I'd been here a week ago, I'm sure the tone would have been a little bit different. But good.
Last week was so depressing. Last week was maybe one of the most depressing episodes we've ever done of this show. So it's crazy how much can change in a week.
Yeah, especially this early in the season.
Yeah. So go ahead, Andrew. I know you have quite a few. I have quite a few. Let's make the most of our time.
Right. So let's start with the Rangers finally have won 3 in a row. Mike Sullivan has come in, and for all of the defensive, let's just say issues to put a blanket over last season, a little some issues here and there last season defensively. He's kind of done a 180 with essentially the same roster, at least for the first month of the season. They went from a team that couldn't defend a chair to a team that is looking like they can actually, do well. And they didn't give up a single high danger chance to Seattle in the entire game. What have you seen out of Mike Sullivan so far, and how has he able to make such a drastic 180 in such a short amount of time?
I love, and I'm sure Ranger fans love hearing what Steve Valiquette has to say on the broadcast. And I love, he's a friend and he's given me access to his site. So I love to dive into the clear site stats. I think obviously the numbers from last year, god awful all the way across the board. So for me, the change with Mike Sullivan, I want to go back 2 years, which was a conference final team under Peter Laviolette. Their defense was okay that year, but chances against off the rush, they were 28th in the league in terms of high danger chances off the rush. Last year, they're actually better, 26th, but still terrible. And they were bad under Gerard Gallant too. This year, so far, small sample size, second in that category. So I think that to me illustrates what Mike Sullivan has done, which is he's a great coach, comes in, he identifies what the main issues are with this team. I think he identified maybe the talent level, which is a little bit different than it's been in years past. And I think he's able to get his message across to this team, which is still a lot of holdovers from these previous years, which is you guys have skill. You guys know how to score goals. That's not working. We need to defend first. We need to be a team that doesn't give up a ton of chances. We need to be a team that doesn't give up a ton off the rush, putting our goalies under strain, clearing the front of the net, the house around Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick, which was a terrible area for them last season as well. And for the most part, like you said, he's done that. And I think that's a huge credit to him, to David Quinn, who's a guy as the associate coach who's come into a very unique situation as a previous head coach who was fired by the same GM, mind you, to come back in and coach the D and be part of Sullivan's staff along with Joe Sacco. So these guys, I think, are definitely on the right track with this team to kind of get that mindset changed of we're going to be the kind of team that defends hard. We still have an all-world goalie in net, and we still have some guys that can score. The last part of that has been the part that's been the slowest to come, even though the numbers look great. They're getting chances. You can kind of pick out some individual games early on, especially the ones at home, where opposing goalies were really sharp against them. It seemed like everybody that came into the Garden the first 2 weeks of the season had one of their best games in a long time. So it's hard to, considering that everybody still got fresh memories of how bad last season was, it's hard to be patient and say it's going to come. But I think between the data and now these last few games, and especially, Andrew, like you said, that game in Seattle, where 13 chances total, according to ClearSight, 1 mid-danger, no high danger. That to me is kind of the culmination of what Mike Sullivan has been coaching and teaching since he got here. And if they can hit their stride with that and kind of take off with it and keep going in the majority of their games, it's going to be a good season for them for sure.
What do you make of that trade-off based on where we're seeing the NHL go right now, where save percentages across the board are diving terribly? We're looking at goalie league average goaltending being 900, under 900. Do you think it's feasible for a team that has the aspirations the Rangers do to pursue this mentality? Or is this is what we have, so we have to do the best we can with what we have?
I go back to Steve Valiquette and his ClearSight. I hate to be such a cult member of ClearSight and Steve.
Steve is great, and his website's great. We're all cult members. It's totally you're a member. We're all members. It's okay.
Yeah, it's great. But I think if you look at the history since they've been compiling their data, which I think is about 7 or 8 years now, the teams that are consistently successful in the playoffs are the teams that give up the fewest high danger chances. And have the best chance differential in terms of stuff that they generate versus stuff they give up. It's year after year, teams that are in the top half of that group are the ones that not only have success in the regular season, but go deep in the playoffs. It's not fully predictive, but it definitely puts you in the right ballpark. So you can't be a team that trades chances. You can't be a team that says, okay, we've got Igor Shesterkin. We'll be fine at that end as long as we keep up the East-West razzle-dazzle stuff with all our high-end guys. And I think we've seen, under 2 different coaches here, the limits of that style of play for the Rangers. They can get far by playing really well and having great goaltending and getting timely scoring, but not far enough. They can't get over the hump against a Lightning team that knew how to win 4 years ago and a Florida team that clearly knows how to win, especially that time of year. You have to have that mentality to be able to grind. I think, it sounds like a really old cliche, and I'm sure in the internet, the social media age, when you use those terms that I think call to mind a guy like John Tortorella, when you say grit or jam or whatever it is, people roll their eyes and the younger set and say, there's got to be a better way. Well, if there is a better way, I'd like to see it, because it's such a marathon of 2 months of the playoffs. You have to be able to overcome injuries. You have to be able to have that structure you can go back to win a 2-1 double overtime game when nobody's got enough energy to make a spectacular play. So I think that to me is the trade-off, that you're going to get some more boring low event games. You're going to get some games like the one in Seattle where, the Rangers are generating a lot of chances. And we sort of look at this team now and say, I think that's maybe the thing you get sucked into with expected goals and things like that is, who are you expecting the goals from? I think the quality of the person that's generating them sometimes makes a difference. And so the Rangers maybe have dropped down a bit talent-wise in terms of skill, where you're missing K'Andre Miller, you're missing a power play merchant and a goal scoring machine like Chris Kreider. We're even missing a guy like Jacob Trouba, because he puts their defensive core in the right spots. You're missing Philip Hedl, you're missing Capo Caco, guys who certainly had their ups and downs here, but maybe a little bit more skilled than what you're seeing from the third line these days. So you make that trade-off, and now you've got a team that can grind out goals and grind out wins. It's a hard way to go, but I think for Mike Sullivan and his coaching staff and for Chris Drury, this is the team they wanted. They want a guy like, an ultimate grinder who's got skill like JT Miller kind of at the forefront of it. And when they're healthy, they should have enough depth to be able to score 2 or 3 a game. And you got to be able to win those kind of games. And they really haven't been able to for a lot of time over these last 4 or 5 years.
So piggybacking off of the perceived lack of offense from this team, the 2 biggest moves that Chris Drury made this season, this offseason, was trading away Chris Kreider, and he did not get a goal scorer in return, and he traded away K'Andre Miller and got Scott Morrow, who is not currently on the team. So, one, why make that Kreider trade specifically if you are not going to replace that goal scoring power play merchant? But the power play is currently struggling without him, clearly. Why didn't Drury replace him? And what do you think about those overall moves, given the replacements aren't here?
I think the motivation for those moves was more about continuing to change the makeup of the team, the makeup of the core, really. K'Andre Miller, a couple of years ago when he had his 40-point season, you thought, okay, this guy's got the tools. He's putting it together. He's going to be in this top 4, maybe on the top pair with Adam Fox for a long, long time. And it just never quite seemed to work out. And who knows if it was personality mix? Who knows if it was just not being able to take that next step? Who knows if it was coaching? Who knows if it was a combination of all different factors? But Chris Drury clearly identified that instead of signing him to a long-term deal, they wanted to find a different mix on defense. And that, K'Andre Miller's a hard guy to replace. He's got an incredibly unique skill set, which is why the Rangers picked him in the first place and why he was able to rise up so fast through their ranks. So you take him off, you're not really going to replace him. Scott Morrow, I don't know if anybody knows what they've got in him right now. at best, I think right now he's more of a third pair guy, but you certainly know you're not going to get the offense from the blue line without Keandre Miller backing up Adam Fox, because it's really just Adam Fox and maybe a little bit of Braden Schneider and maybe a little bit of some of the other second and third pair guys. This is a stay-at-home style defense, which is another reason for Mike Sullivan to identify we're not going to be able to get in a track meet and get up and down the ice because we've got, one guy who can score 60 or 70 points, and then the rest of them might get 70 put together, all the other five guys. So that's number one for me. And Kreider, I think it's more about what went on last year, starting to break down a bit with some injuries and just the unhappiness, the malaise that was kind of around the team once his name was out there in the kind of the group chat heard around the world back in last year around this time between him and Truba. I think it's just hard to walk that back with a guy who's been here as long as he has, and a guy who's, I think he's an interesting personality. He's a very sensitive guy. He's not really built to be a guy who's got a thick skin, who can withstand a lot of slings and arrows. I think he's always been really well positioned on this Ranger team to be a leader, but not have to be the leader. I always would chuckle a bit and hear from people who work for the Rangers when fans would be like, when they were picking a captain, it's like, it's gotta be Kreider. And it's just like, if you spend a little time with him, you'd know it's just not his personality. It doesn't make him a bad guy. He's not an extrovert. He's not a rah guy. He's not a let's all get behind me and let me talk about it. He likes to do his work in private and quiet. And so I think once that came out, he's obviously a skilled player, and you can see now he's having a great effect in Anaheim. He's scoring goals there. He was sick for a little while, but he's in the right mix. That team looks a lot like the Rangers 4 or 5 years ago with an interesting mix of really high-end young guys and some veterans. And I think they're going to be dangerous. So it's just, you'd love to have replaced him with someone who can produce like that, but there's not that many guys that can produce like that. So you've taken two kind of unicorns off your roster for various reasons. And if you're Chris Drury, you can't just go out and make a 1-for-1 style trade and get somebody back that's similar to those guys. You got to make that decision and live with it. And I think you live with it by bringing in a coach in Mike Sullivan and paying him more than any other coach is being paid, and say, you've got this roster now, turn it into a defensive style group. And I think that's kind of part of the reason where we are right now.
So going down memory lane one last time in this conversation, how difficult do you think this is conceptually for Mike Sullivan, who we all think is a very good coach, to walk into the group coming off of the season they had last year and trying to reassemble it, to build these guys back up and get them to play the type of hockey he needs them to?
I think a coach of his caliber says, I can do it. He's coached in New York before with John Tortorella. So he understands kind of the brief of being a New York Rangers coach. And I think the success that he had in Pittsburgh kind of right away with a group that also needed to kind of be not rebuilt, but when he came to coach them and took them to back-to-back Stanley Cups, it was a very established group with a few, new guys in the mix. And they had to learn to adjust and play a little bit of a different style to kind of recapture the success that Crosby and Malkin had a few years before. So it's not a 1-for-1 comparison that the Rangers can just kind of jump right in and jump to the front of the line and be a great team again. But I think, he's taking this job. To me, he's taking this regardless. If it's a possibility out there, once he leaves Pittsburgh, this is the job he wants. And I think he's probably given it some serious thought, even as the roster was still changing once he took the job, that I know, if you're Mike Sullivan, I know how to make this team defend harder, because he was part of a group that did nothing but defend in the mid 2010s and had incredible success doing it, about as much as they could have possibly had. And so he's coming in and saying, I can remake this group. I think they've got the right guys. And I think you're also still in this sort of transitional evaluation period. You've got Artemi Panarin, who's not yet signed. And, my understanding is they still want to sign him, but that can obviously be fluid as the season goes on. You've got Mika Zibanejad, who's obviously got the no move and doesn't want to go anywhere, but the contract is kind of getting deeper into years with that. And maybe he wants to, if the team isn't going in the right direction, he might want to make a change. So, I think there's still an opportunity for Sullivan to kind of fit into what Chris Drury wants, which is to continue to remodel this team and kind of get to a new phase where, you've got some of these young guys coming up, whether it's Gabe Perreault or Brett Berard, guys that can start to fit in the top six, and not necessarily replace guys that are here, but just create more opportunities for some younger guys, become a bit more of a heavier team, and just look a bit different, look like a team that can compete and stay at the top, as opposed to kind of the roller coaster they've been on the last 4 years.
And speaking about the young guys, I was in the locker room a little bit at the end of last season talking to Brennan Othman, and it's kind of seemed like there was a sense that he's going to put this together. He had a couple, he had some good chances last season, just couldn't score, but he had moments where, okay, this is where he figures it out. This summer is going to be where he takes that next step. And then you get to training camp, and then he didn't make the team. And then he got up here again, and he didn't play well. And now another player is getting called up ahead of him. First, what's up with Othman? And is this the beginning of the end of Othman in the Rangers system?
It's hard to say. The rumors were coming out that they were, willing to look at kind of finding him a new spot. And to me, that probably is a conversation that's had between Brennan Othman's agent and Chris Drury, where that this is whatever his second or third real chance when he comes into training camp, and a quick hook essentially shows that maybe a change of scenery would be best. They can't really find that because you're not really looking to just sort of give him away. And he comes up and plays a couple of games. Then he's basically the 13th forward essentially on this road trip, which isn't helping anybody. So they get back, he's back down. It's a tough roller coaster for a kid who's got a lot of confidence to be on. I think some of the knocks on him, even in his draft year, that, skating was not super elite, that he wanted to play a very physical style. He wanted to have that Brad Marchand style, but, physically, I don't think he's big enough and strong enough to withstand playing that style against NHL players. So I think he's kind of caught in between. This is kind of I think you've seen it with guys like Jimmy Vesey in the past, who were highly touted coming out of the amateur ranks, guys who had been scorers. And it takes a couple of years to figure out that maybe that's not going to be your role as a pro. You're going to be more of a third, fourth line guy. You've got to work on your skating. You've got to work on your physicality. You've got to work on being a, penalty kill, stuff that maybe you didn't do in junior and maybe you didn't do at the start of your AHL career. So, he's still a very young guy at 22. But maybe this is sort of that period, and maybe most likely it will happen with another organization where they see him in a different light, kind of put him in a different situation to succeed. It's not the first time it's happened in the NHL. It's certainly not the first time it's happened with the Rangers. And I'm sure you guys could just unroll the scroll of all the forwards who have flamed out of this organization without really having an impact, who are picked in the first round. I'm sure I can think of 3 or 4 right off the top of my head right now. You guys could probably double or triple that. But yeah, it's, I think it's just one of those things where, there were knocks on Gabe Perreault, which is why he fell in the first round. And he seems to be right now pushing those to the side, where he's thriving. He's a point per game guy in the AHL, starting to figure it out. You don't want to rush him, but you've also know that you've got him at the head of the class. I think Brett Berard has shown that he can compete in the NHL and kind of fill that role where he's a bit of a scorer and a bit of a pain in the ass type on a third or fourth line. And I don't think Brennan Othman has kind of figured out what he needs to be. And I think the longer it takes for that, the harder it would be for him to succeed in this organization.
So speaking of first round picks who had to go to other places to figure it out, that brings us to JT Miller, someone I wanted to talk about from just what do you make of the way that unfolded last year, the way he's been thrust into this leadership role and how he's taken it so far?
I think I get the sense that he wanted something like this. He wanted a situation like this. And I think that was part of the friction for him in Vancouver. I think he's got an edge to his personality just in his day-to-day demeanor. He demands a lot of himself. He demands a lot of others. I don't think he does it in the most positive way. And that is not That is not a knock on him. I think we all have those moments in our lives where whether it's with our kids or with our colleagues or whatever, where we say like, do I want to be a supportive, positive presence in this person's life, or do I have to use a little bit of negative reinforcement, or is it just sort of my natural state to be, to lead with a little bit less kindness and a little bit less sugar and a little bit more pepper. And that's who JT Miller is. And I think it's well established. I think his teammates, when he was younger, maybe saw some of that attitude mixed with a little immaturity. And in Vancouver, I think he just felt like this team needs a leader, needs a vocal guy. And at least in the case of Elias Pettersson, didn't work. It was oil and water. So somebody had to go. And I think now when you look at that Vancouver team, you wonder it could, soon enough, if somebody wants to take on Pettersson's contract, they could both be gone. And that to me, seeing how Vancouver has played and seeing how Pettersson has played vindicates Miller a little bit in my mind, that it's like, okay, these were maybe personalities that weren't meant to be together on the same team. That doesn't mean they're bad players or anything. But I think that comes from a place of Miller's desire to be a leader, to start to be a guy who says, I'm in my 30s. I've had a 100-point season. I can be a star in this league. He's on the U.S. Four Nations team. He's going to be on the Olympic team most likely. So he wants that challenge. And the Rangers making that trade clearly kind of said, okay, sign long enough, immovable contract no matter what happens. We want you to be that guy. And I think kind of moving away from Kreider, Truba, Miller, maybe even a Panarin or a Zibanejad, you're sort of seeing the change in the core now towards a Miller, Trocheck, that style of guys that are maybe not considered true superstars in this league, but can be in your face and play with an edge and sort of do the 200-foot play the right way style of hockey, and also try to drag some guys into the fight. So I think it's been tough, and I think the toughest part for him this season is that clearly he wasn't 100% physically for however long, maybe up until that Edmonton game when he made that, the OT goal maybe was the thing that kind of clicked it in for him, and then another great play in overtime. But yeah, when you watch him play, you say this isn't the same guy who we saw even last season. I think whatever happened to him in that practice right before the season started was a little bit more debilitating than he was willing to let on. I think once you saw Trocheck go out for an extended time, I'm sure he said to his coach and to whoever would listen and to himself, I can't come out of the lineup right now. They need somebody to stabilize things in the middle. So he's playing through it. Hasn't looked great. Has had a couple of a real sort of like, that guy looks really injured type moments. But I think he's starting to come out of it, and I think the production helps too. So it's definitely a work in progress. I think the only thing you'd worry about if you were him is if you look back at the recent history of Ranger captains. When things start to go south, I think that's who usually gets the spotlight put on them, whether it's Ryan Callahan, Ryan McDonough, Jacob Trouba. So, you got to watch your back, but I guess that comes with the territory. You got to know what happens before they stitch the C on there.
Speaking of first round picks, there's a first overall pick that is drawing the ire of quite a number of fans.
You can just say everybody.
Of everybody. So I'm going to ask this in the broadest way possible. Alexis Lafreniere, what's going on?
And obviously social media is not always the biggest representation, but I feel like in my previous job at The Athletic, I got a bit of a rep among Ranger fans for hating on Lafreniere. And, I have no dog in the fight. People in the league tell me what they think of him or what's going on with him. That's all there is. I remember a couple of summers ago, I reported, on free agency day that the Rangers were shopping him. The Rangers vehemently denied it. I'm going to stand by it. And then the next summer they were shopping him before they signed him to that extension. So, what are you going to do? That's just the way that the hockey world works. But, I think now we're in a tougher spot with him because he does have that contract locked in. And pretty much ever since he signed it, he hasn't looked great. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with what went on last season. Everybody looked terrible last season. And I think this year with Trocheck being out and him kind of like not, he's had some opportunities with as many of the skilled forwards as he has, and he's fitting in now in more of a grinding second line between, with Noah Laba and Will Cooley. In the last couple of games, they've looked great. They've defended well. But of all the things we talked about with team defense, you still need guys to score. And are you paying Alexis Lafreniere this kind of money to defend? I mean, you want it to be part of the package, but that can't be the whole package with him. He's not Taylor Radish. He's not Matt Rempe. He's not Adam Edstrom. He's, like you said, #1 overall pick, a guy who's shown some flashes where we thought, okay, this is it. And it's usually happened in the playoffs, which is exactly when you want to see your #1 overall pick shine. But you still got to be able to help get your team there. And I think the part that's maybe the most frustrating for Ranger fans when you watch him play is this guy was an elite playmaker to get himself to be the #1 pick. Where has that guy been? You know, he's shown himself to be a scorer at times. He has made some good plays, but he is not a self-generating offensive machine. He's not a Panarin. He's not even a Mika Zibanejad where you use your speed and kind of separate people from yourself to get free for a big shot. He's a guy who needs good players around him, and I don't know if you can build an offense around a guy like that. You know, he's been able to get some power play one time, which, gosh, everybody's been begging for years. And I think, again, going back to clear sight hockey, out of every player in the league now in terms of scoring chances, expected goals off their own scoring chances versus actual goals, that's, you know, the kind of the expected goal differential, he is the biggest negative right now in the league. He's, I believe, scoring 4 or 5 less. You know, he's got 1 goal on about 6 expected goals so far this year. So he's had some bad luck too. And the power play that he's a part of is #3 in the league in expected goals at 5-on-4. So the Rangers should be scoring more with him on the ice. He should be scoring more off his scoring chances, and he's not. So is this a skill issue? Is he not the skilled player we thought he was? Is this a luck issue? Is it going to turn at some point? Which we do sort of feel like when we see these numbers that eventually it will come back to, you know, regress to the mean. The probability can't be that off for so long. But it also, you add it to the full body of work that we've seen in 5 years, 6 years, and you say, is this guy going to be the guy, one of the guys for this Ranger team? Because they absolutely need it more than ever because of who's not here anymore. And, you know, you see him kind of look to the heavens. He's hit a couple posts. You know, it's interesting to sort of see the body language. You know, we don't have a lot of great body language guys in this team. Adam Fox, who's an incredible player, maybe has the worst poker face in the NHL where something bad goes for him on the ice. So you want to see Lafreniere kind of take that step maturity wise. You want to see him take that step team wise and be a guy who can put the team on his back when they need it offensively. And we haven't seen it. And you do wonder, you know, I see some of the insiders in the league kind of hinting like, oh, the Rangers could make some big changes if things don't, you know, go south. Usually it's Panarin they're talking about, Zibanejad, who's probably a guy Chris Drury would love to have a little more flexibility in moving. But to me, Lafreniere maybe is a guy who's still young. I know the contract is long. It's not super expensive when you think about where the cap's going to go. I do kind of wonder if there's a team out there, whether, I don't know if it's the Canadians, if it's, you know, if Jeff Gorton loved him so much when they picked him first overall that he desperately want to have him again, especially in his hometown, which could be a lot of pressure. But there's another team out there that'd be willing to add him to the mix and kind of see him in a different light as the Rangers do. You know, a lot depends, I guess, on this season and maybe next season, and then you start to think maybe they could make a change there. But yeah, the frustration is certainly evident on Laf's face. It's evident with the fans, and I don't want to say 2 years after reporting all that I was right or anything like that. But I think these questions,
take your victory lap, or take it all the way.
It's just a point that these questions around the league with other executives and other teams have been there for a long time with him. And I think the Rangers are sort of feeling the full effect of it now.
So going off of the JT Miller question, Panarin we've alluded to, it kind of feels like this team is missing something. And we all know that they're probably missing at least one player. Do you think that's an internal thing that somebody in this mix, whether it's Perreault, Othman, Berard, etc., or somebody who's already been called up, maybe Noah Laba emerges maybe a little bit better than we thought he was? Or do you feel like that has to be an external addition, that nobody in the mix right now feels capable of being the caliber of player they need? The hope was, of course, Lafreniere would be that guy, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case.
I mean, I think it's got to be external. They don't have a ton else coming. I think the emergence of a guy like Lava is such a welcome thing. You think about if this kid wasn't here now and wasn't really close, and nobody, he wasn't on a ton of people's radar, even after he had a nice run in Bridgeport after he left college at the end of last season. With Trocheck out long term, what the hell would they be doing at center? It would be a disaster right now. I don't even know if they'd be. Yeah, they're essentially 500 right now. Would they even be close to that record if they didn't have a guy to plug in as now the number 2 center, who'd been the number 3 center? So I think they're kind of doing what they can do. Being smart with Perot, hoping that Othman can figure it out, trying out some of these other guys like Schmelosh coming up. I don't know if he's even going to get in a game, but trying to see what they have in some of these other guys. But nobody's really standing out to say, this guy is just waiting in the wings to take over. And to me, the thing that's missing is another high-end defenseman. They're not easy to find, obviously, or else they probably would have made a better deal for Keandre Miller and brought one in that was ready to step right into the lineup. But I think when you think about their offense, the modern NHL, no matter what kind of team you have, whether you have super skilled team, whether you have a team that likes to be defense first, whatever, you've got to get defensemen that get up in the play. You've got to get defensemen that get the puck out of their zone, get themselves out of the zone, get up into the rush. When they get in the offensive zone, cause a little chaos, get moving around, get pucks to the net, be able to skate well. There's a lot of requirements for a good NHL defenseman these days. And they haven't drafted high enough to luck into a situation like the Islanders have with Matthew Schaefer, which I'm sure makes it feel doubly annoying as a Ranger fan that if the ping pong balls or the end of the season had gone just a slightly different way, this is a kid that could have fallen into the Rangers' lap and been out there doing what he's doing for the Islanders, Madison Square Garden. What an incredible situation that would have been. So you've got to start looking around and seeing, and it feels like every time it's mostly forwards comes off the board as a potential free agent for next summer or the summer after. It's just like every Ranger fan I follow on social media is like, all right, well, there we go. We got nothing left now. And I think this is just how it's going to be. You're going to have to trade for someone. It's going to be a big asset trade where you give up a lot to get something. And I didn't do my research before we jumped on here to think about who that guy might be, who a defenseman might be. I think even a guy like Mario Ferraro in San Jose, who, is not a game-breaking type player, but just a guy who skates well, can provide some offense, does well enough in his own zone. Maybe in a Sullivan system, he would be even better than he's been on a very disappointing San Jose team the last few years. I think just having another top 4 guy that can move the puck and move himself well would go a really long way on this Ranger team. And it's, Will Borgen is a decent NHL defenseman. I felt like that contract was a little hasty for me.
We talked about it for a whole year now. Now that
17 games,
17 games, they got a 5-year deal. To do what?
That was tough for me. Braden Schneider, I feel like when we're talking about Lafreniere, we could probably also be talking about Braden Schneider, at least offensively. He had a nice play in Edmonton the other night following up the rush, and I'm sure he wants to be doing that kind of stuff, but we've seen him now for a few years, and I don't know if he's ever going to be anything other than a second or third pair, more stay-at-home type guy. Carson Soucy, very up and down. Urho Vakanainen, I think, is what he is, and is the reason he was a high draft pick and flamed out of a couple of organizations that were pretty thin at defense. And like you said, Scott Morrow, we'd probably love to see him here sooner rather than later. I think Matthew Robertson's been a nice story this year as a guy who seemingly disappeared from the top of the prospect pool for a long time and now shown at least he can be a third pair guy and play some minutes. But you need somebody that's going to eat some minutes, whether it's on the left side or on, preferably on the left side, but just wherever, to be that second pair anchor. You think about where they were with Lindgren and Fox and Miller and Truba in the last few years. Like, that was a top 4 that could, when they were at their best, could stand up with anybody in the league. You never had a problem with any of those guys being on the ice in important situations. And now 3 of them are gone. So it's a huge change. You like having Vladislav Gavrikov here, but I think through 12 games and through the style of play that Sullivan wants to play, he is what he is, which is guy who's very steady and dependable, but is not super flashy and is not going to be a guy who, if you switched up those pairs, is going to suddenly turn into an offensive guy when he's not playing with Adam Fox. So to me, that's the thing that's kind of the most imperative right now, is to get somebody on that blue line that can push the play, that can get up in transition, that can break up plays, and be a complementary player to Adam Fox. Not even if he's not a D pair partner, because it's a difficult situation. It's amazing to me to look at that second power play unit anchored by Braden Schneider, and they've actually had some good moments.
Yeah,
but that is not an NHL second power play unit. It just isn't. You need to have at least a second guy who can quarterback a power play. You need to have a second guy who can take some of the heat off Adam Fox, penalty killing, just eating up all those minutes. That's my main concern. I think Fox has had a really good year so far, but you do have that worry with his injury problems that he kind of hampered him in the playoffs 2 years ago, and got a slow start last year. Is he going to wear down playing 25, 26 minutes as the games get more important if they can get in a groove, because they do rely on him so much to get the puck up the ice.
You mentioned his name a couple of minutes ago, and I wanted to circle back and talk to you about this and ask you about this specifically. You mentioned Barclay Goodrow. The Rangers got rid of him and his full contract somehow from going to San Jose, and analytically, he was one of, if not the worst forward in the entire league last season. And despite that, it seemed like the narrative from the Rangers the entire season, especially when everything was going not their way and they were losing and they were, falling out of a playoff spot, was everybody's mad about Barclay Goodrow. Everybody's mad about this. Everybody's mad about, these potential trade rumors and Barclay Goodrow. Barclay Goodrow was like the centerpiece of the entire debacle, the entirety of last season, it seemed like. Was it really, or was there other issues surrounding that? And, and also, while the sky was falling, the Rangers continued to keep Laviolette, and Laviolette also didn't change anything. The sky was falling, and he was like, "Oh, this is fine. It's whatever. Like, we won't change anything." And it continued to happen without really any repercussions. Can you shed some light maybe as to why the things last season happened the way that they did?
I think it's more about the process rather than the personnel. I think guys understand when you don't win, there's going to be changes. And I think in particular, a guy like Barclay Goodrow, who signed a long-term deal and came in in a trade. The Lightning traded his rights here. Drury immediately signed him to a 6-year deal for too much money. It's too long a term, but had a very specific goal in mind, which was this guy wins. Until he got to San Jose, he had never missed the playoffs at any level, which is insane. And he did what he was brought here to do, which is he's not a showy guy. Like, I think he just sort of sets an example every day for people who maybe don't have that kind of example to have seen before. And didn't produce a ton. Had that great run at the end of the 24 playoffs, but I think it's more a matter of how Chris Drury has handled some of these departures, whether it was the group chat text about Kreider and Truba, whether it was Goodrow, who, 15, I hadn't heard about, wasn't offered up in a trade as far as he or his agent knew. And then 15 minutes before the waiver time, which I believe is 2:00, he gets a call from Chris Drury and says, "We're putting you on waivers, goodbye." And that's it. And that's the end of his 4 years there. And, business is business. Everybody has to accept that. It's a very public business. So, if you've got hurt feelings, maybe this isn't the business for you as a player. I totally get that. But it can have a ripple effect. And I think this idea that that whether it was media or whoever, the Rangers trying to put out this idea that this shows their group was soft, that they couldn't handle business being done. Okay, you can say that, but good luck getting lots of people who are wanted around the league and other places to come here. You can trade for them for sure, but when it comes to free agency, is Connor McDavid looking at this situation and saying, that's a place that I'd love to go for 8 years, and I guess not, it'd be 7 years with Connor McDavid, but you can't. It's hard to quantify or sort of do other than anecdotally say, I don't know if this is the case. And you talk to different agents. Some agents get pissed off when they hear this stuff, especially the ones whose players get treated this way. Some agents are like, what are you going to do? Everybody does this stuff at some point or another. But I think the drumbeat from the beginning of the summer with Barclay Goodrow, that they pushed this guy aside instead of just being direct with him and saying, we have to move you because we have this cap issue and you're the guy that we're going to try to move, and we're going to, we'll try to work with you, but I got to do what I got to do. I think that conversation would have gone a long way, and it didn't happen. So then the players are kind of sore. We get into training camp. There's talk, the summer nonsense about Jacob Trouba happens with trade rumor coming out.
He was in Detroit, and then he wasn't.
Right. I mean, it was, the people that I talked to, a couple of them are friendly with Steve Yzerman, and they said, zero of this has actually happened. There's been no conversations. So then you've got Trouba's wife dragged into the mix. It just became a mess. And so he is a guy who, even though he's the captain, can he still lead this team? So it felt like a little bit of like, it just sort of kept pushing on and kept pushing on and kept pushing on. And I think the point where it burst was really the group chat after the bad game in Edmonton, where Drury says everybody's available, especially our captain and our longest tenured guy who's, won the Rod Gilbert Award. And just, so I think inside that room, you suddenly have guys that are saying, what are we doing here? Like, are we a team? Are we getting picked off one by one? Is this like a murder mystery game here where we just we come to the room and somebody's got pulled out? So, I think it kind of the Goodrow situation was the original sin, but it was because it just didn't stop at any point. And I don't think there was enough, as far as some of the players and their agents were concerned. I don't know if there was enough communication, there was enough transparency about what was going on with management, what they were trying to do. And I think it just sort of hurt everybody. And it hurt the coach too. Like Peter Laviolette, how can you coach a group that is kind of wondering, am I next? I don't know what you can change with that. You could probably bring up 10 guys and sit the rest of them out until they get traded, but I don't know how good that is for business. So I think everybody was affected by it. And again, business is business. Like you said, they did find a way to get rid of all of Barclay Goodrow's contract. They found a way to get rid of all of Chris Kreider's contract. They didn't end up committing big money and big term to Keandre Miller, which probably in the long run is a safe bet here. And they're probably not going to do the same with Artemi Panarin. If they can get him short term and somewhere around 10 million, maybe he'll stay. But otherwise, I would imagine that at the end of this season, you could see the same situation unfolding with him, where he's got a no move and doesn't want to go, but may have to consider going because he wants to see what options are out there. So, the end result is something that's probably in the long term can be a positive for the Rangers. How you get there is maybe not the best business practice for the Rangers. And I think we'll see in the next couple of years if there's people around the league that it stays with them when they have an opportunity to come here and they have some options. If they say, I don't know if I want to come to the Rangers, because what happens in 2 years when I have my no move and I'm still signed long term and the GM says, yeah, you got to go. And all of a sudden my life is turned upside down. It's, you have limited sympathy for people that are making not $8, $9, $10 million. I totally get it, but they're also human beings and they do have these same concerns.
So last question from me, and thank you again for joining us. For a team that looks kind of to be determined, and I think we could say that on a big scale, what would you say are indicators that maybe we should be looking out for that this team is making progress in how it's playing, the results it's getting? What does a good outcome look like for this particular group?
I think obviously if you get your actual goals more in line with the expected goals, that just means the process is working well and you just have to stick with it, as everybody likes to say. But I think for me, it's the high danger chances against. If they can keep those to, I think the 5s per game is really the sweet spot. If you're under that, you're super elite defensively. And even in the 5 to 6 range, I think this team can still be successful being in that range because they've overworked their goalies really. Jonathan Quick seems to be, he's Inspector Gadget, like nothing seems to bother him. It's incredible at his age. But if you can keep Shesterkin from being overworked in the regular season and they can be a playoff team, I think that goes a long way too, where you become a team that plays hard enough in front of your goalie so that he doesn't have to face 8 or 9 of these high danger chances every game. And I feel like I use the Laviolette term noisy when you see some of those where they're just like, whether it's off the rush, sometimes you think like, all right, 2-on-1, goalies can stop a 2-on-1. But it's the ones where you've got guys spread out in the defensive zone and suddenly the middle of the ice is wide open and it looks like a bad drill in practice where the goalie's just, okay, hopefully he stops that because it's pretty ridiculous. There's someone alone in front of his net. And gosh, even back to 22, when Gerard Gallant and his coaching staff kind of changed things around in November after having a successful but terrible metric-wise start, where they started to fix their defense in their own zone and fix themselves up the ice to sort of build a little more structure. This team has just given up too much. And Shesterkin is one of Vezina because he was able to withstand it. I look at some of the expected numbers in terms of the goaltending from Clear Sight. They have the highest expected save percentage in the league right now, the Rangers. They're 2 goalies, and that's great. That's what you want. That means you're keeping your chances to the mid danger to low danger. You want tons of low danger chances to warm up a goalie and get him into a game. So I think they're doing the right things. 6-5-1 maybe is a little bit undeserving or 6-5-2 rather for what they've been on the ice to the eye test and to the metrics. So I think if they keep along this path, you could see a 10-3-1 month in November or December, and suddenly you're among the elite. You look at and you look at the standings right now, where you see there's a 5-point gap between the best team in the East and the worst team in the East. It's incredible. What are there? 12 teams with either 13 or 14 points. So the flip side of it is if you lose 3 or 4 in a row, you could be in real trouble because everybody else seems to be able to kind of counteract any bad losing streaks. So health is clearly important because their depth is not as good, especially down the middle. They can't afford a Noah Laba injury. They can't afford a Sam Carrick injury. Who would have ever thought you throw those 2 names out and be like, please, these guys cannot get hurt. But, Trocheck will be back eventually. And I think I'm curious to see how they're going to look and how they're going to play, whether Trocheck's return can turn up the results for Lafreniere if that line gets back together. If they keep it with the 2 of them and Will Cooley, can that be a line like it is with Noah Laba right now, where they defend really well and they have puck possession really well, but are they going to be a little bit snake bit because those 3 guys are not necessarily chance generators and chance finishers on their own? So, there's definitely some questions offensively for this team going forward. And I do wonder if they're in a position to add at the deadline, whether they can even do it, because you still have these open-ended questions about whether Panarin wants to commit for another couple of years, how much more you want to change. So, it's, I think a successful season going forward, at least into the next couple of months to get through Christmas, let's say, is they continue to defend well. They continue to create chances. They finish some of these chances now. You see guys like Lafreniere get a little bit more results, get a little healthier, and then you can reassess once you get into the new year and say, are we a team that's going to buy like they've done in their successful seasons the last few years, or are we still going to be in this what are we mode and what are we going forward, because we don't know what Panarin wants to do and we don't know what we want to do with him.
Arthur Stable, one of the absolute best in the media industry. Really appreciate your time today. You're hosting Hockey Night New York, which is an awesome show, but you aren't writing anymore. Is that something like, are we going to see you back in the locker room anytime soon? What's going on?
We'll see. I'm just enjoying what I'm doing right now. It's been 30 years of doing daily reporting, so very different to be just doing a podcast. Got some other things in the works that hopefully we can announce soon. So, stay tuned. See Twitter, Stape NHL, or Blue Sky, or wherever, and it's got some fun stuff coming. It'll be good.
Sources say there's fun stuff coming. Art, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You got it, guys. Thanks a lot. This was great.